I love him. I really do. But inside this tiny room, I feel like I'm slowly losing control of my own life. A drawer, a bed, a few dumplings, things that should mean nothing are becoming silent battles that eat away at me. And I can't stop asking myself, am I selfish? Or is this the beginning of the end for us? When people talk about love, they often imagine the big moments, the first kiss, the late night confessions, the kind of memories you'd put on a highlight reel of your relationship. Nobody talks about the quiet, everyday spaces where love actually lives or where it begins to suffocate. For me, that space was my bedroom. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't one of those airy, Pinterest-worthy apartments with white curtains and sunlight pouring in. No, my room was small, really small. It was the kind of room that feels like it was designed as an afterthought, a box carved out of a larger house just to make it work. My closet? Less than 3 feet wide, custom built by my dad years ago, crammed with hangers fighting for space. My dresser? Brand new, a project I had taken on by myself. 8 drawers stacked neatly, each promising the illusion of order I didn't yet have. I had this system, if you could call it that, for surviving in a room too small for my life. Off-season clothes went into a suitcase under the bed, heavy coats lived in another room, and I rotated things in and out like a store that only had one shelf to display everything. It wasn't ideal, but it worked. Or at least, it worked when I was living alone in it. That was before him. We had been dating for 7 months. 7 months isn't forever, but it's long enough to get past the honeymoon phase. Long enough to discover the quirks that make you laugh and the quirks that slowly chip away at your patience. In the beginning, I loved everything about him. He was sweet, funny, the kind of guy who'd text me good morning and good night without fail. We didn't fight. We didn't have drama. I thought, maybe this is what it's supposed to feel like, easy. But easy doesn't always stay easy, because while I loved him, I also loved my space. I wasn't one of those people who dreamed of living in each other's pockets, sharing every single moment, blending into one indistinguishable us. I needed my alone time, my breathing room, my little rituals of solitude, curling up with a book, watching trash TV in peace, leaving my clothes scattered until I decided it was time to clean, and slowly, without me noticing, those rituals started disappearing. It began innocently enough. He'd come over after practice, or after hanging out with friends, and crash for the night. At first, it was once in a while, 1 or 2 nights a week. Then it became 3, then 4. Then somehow, without either of us saying it out loud, he was basically here 5 nights a week. And that was when my little room, already too small for one person, started to feel like it was shrinking around me. I remember one night, sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the dresser I had just put together. I'd spent hours assembling it, tightening each screw, feeling proud of myself when I slid the drawers in place. It was mine, my small victory in a life where space was always scarce. And then, just a few days later, he slid some of his things into one of the drawers. No conversation, no asking, just decided. This one's mine, he said casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And I just sat there, frozen, a smile plastered on my face that didn't reach my eyes. Because here's the thing, I didn't even have enough space for my clothes. I hadn't even organized them yet. My things were still stuffed into bags, into the corners of my room, waiting for me to find them a home. And suddenly, he had a drawer, his drawer, in my dresser. It sounds small, doesn't it? Stupid even. Who gets upset about a drawer? But in that moment, I felt something shift inside me, something tighten. Like my space, my already limited space, was no longer my own. I told myself to let it go, that it was just a drawer, that this is what relationships are about, sharing. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop thinking about how he hadn't even asked, how he assumed, how once he claimed it, it became his and not mine to give. And that was just the beginning. At first, I laughed it off. I told myself, it's just a drawer. Don't be dramatic. Relationships are about compromise, right? You can't expect to stay in your own perfect bubble forever. When you let someone in, you have to give up a little space. That's what love is, blurring the lines between mine and ours. But then the lines kept blurring. It wasn't just the drawer. It was the bed. My bed, already a twin that barely fit me, now had to hold 2. 5 nights a week, I found myself clinging to the edge like I was about to fall off a cliff, while he sprawled out, snoring softly, completely unaware that my body ached from curling up so tight. The snoring. God. At first it was funny. A kind of adorable imperfection. The way he'd knock out in minutes, making these little noises that I teased him about the next morning. But when it happens night after night, and you're lying there wide awake at 3 a.m. with work the next day, it stops being cute. I bought earplugs. I told myself it was no big deal. But you know what happens when you start adjusting yourself around someone else's habits? You start losing pieces of yourself in the process. Then came the lotion. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Getting upset over lotion. But here's the thing, I'd been using the same one for years. The smell was mine. It was comforting, like a signature that clung to my clothes and my sheets. And one day, without asking, he swapped it out. He brought over his own bottle, and suddenly my skin smelled like him. I wanted to scream. Not because I hated the scent, but because it wasn't my choice. I felt like he was rewriting my space, rewriting me in these tiny, invasive ways. And then there were the dumplings. I know. It sounds petty, but I'd make food just for me. I portioned it out carefully, enough dumplings for exactly one meal, enough sauce mixed just the way I liked it. He'd say, "Nah, I'm not hungry," and then, halfway through my plate, he'd take one or two, and suddenly my perfect little balance was off. Too much sauce left, not enough dumplings, a ratio ruined. And he'd smile, like it was nothing, like it was cute that he was stealing bites. It wasn't cute. It was infuriating, but every time I felt the frustration rise in my chest, I swallowed it back down. I told myself, don't be that girlfriend. Don't be the one who complains about stupid things. Don't ruin a good relationship over a drawer, a bed, a bottle of lotion, a few dumplings. Still, the anger simmered under the surface. Quiet, invisible, but always there. The thing about little things is they don't stay little. They pile up. They stack, one on top of the other, until suddenly you're carrying a weight that feels impossible to hold. And the worst part, he didn't even notice. He went about his days like everything was fine, like we were perfect. He smiled at me, kissed me, called me baby, and claimed space after space in my tiny room as if it had always been his. And me? I smiled back. I laughed at his jokes. I kissed him goodnight. But deep down, every day, I felt my chest tighten. My room was shrinking, my patience was thinning, and I was starting to wonder how long I could keep pretending that none of it bothered me. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by piles of clothes. The kind of mess that makes you question how you even own so many things, and why none of them seem to fit in the space you have. I had been putting this off for weeks, sorting, folding, deciding what stayed in the dresser, what went into storage, what got shoved back into the suitcase under the bed. My dresser was brand new. I had bought it myself, ordered it online, lugged the heavy boxes into my room, and spent hours with a screwdriver and an Allen wrench, piecing it together until it stood proudly against the wall. My project, my accomplishment, my space. And then he walked in. He had this habit of coming over without much warning. Not that I minded seeing him, but there was never a text like, "Hey, is now a good time?" He just appeared, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, dropping it onto the floor like he was already home. That day, he didn't even say hi. He just opened one of the drawers, the third one down, and slid a stack of his t-shirts inside. I froze. I didn't even realize how tightly I was gripping the shirt in my hands until I felt my knuckles ache. "This one's mine," he said casually, like we'd already agreed, like it was some unspoken rule I'd missed. "I'll just keep my stuff here from now on." My throat went dry. Here's the thing, I didn't even have enough room for my clothes. That dresser was already bursting. I had been agonizing over which sweater to put away, which jeans to keep accessible, trying to make a system out of a space that didn't want to cooperate. And now he'd just taken one, claimed it. I tried to smile. I tried to make my voice light. Actually, I don't think I have enough room yet. I still haven't finished organizing." He looked at me confused. "What do you mean? You have 8 drawers." "I'm just taking one. Just taking one." I wanted to scream. It wasn't about the number. It wasn't about the drawer itself. It was about the fact that he hadn't asked, that he hadn't thought, that in his mind, the dresser was automatically ours, and he was entitled to part of it simply because he was here. I swallowed my words. Tried again. "Yeah, but I need all of them right now. I'll let you know once I figure out if there's extra space." And then he rolled his eyes, like I was being unreasonable, like I was the selfish one. "Seriously?" he said, tossing another shirt into the drawer. You have 8. I just want one. Why are you making this a big deal? I felt the heat rise in my chest, the pressure building behind my ribs, because it was a big deal. Not the drawer, the choice. My choice. The fact that he had taken it away without even thinking. But I didn't say that. Instead, I laughed weakly, pretending it wasn't worth fighting about. Pretending I wasn't silently screaming inside. Later, when I tried to vent about it to my mom, she just shook her head. Why not let him have one? He's your boyfriend. It's not like he's asking for half. And that was the moment I realized I was alone in this. And no one else understood. To everyone else, it was just a drawer. To me, it was a symbol, a warning, a reminder that little by little, he was taking up space in my life without asking. And I was letting him. That night, when I crawled into bed beside him, his arm draped over me, his breathing heavy and uneven as he drifted into sleep. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, and all I could think was, it's not about the drawer. It's about me, losing me. All right, let's close out part 1 with part 1D, where the emotional fallout from the drawer incident lingers, deepening the tension and foreshadowing the bigger cracks in the relationship. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my room, warming the messy piles of clothes I hadn't finished sorting. The drawer, the one he had claimed, was half open, a corner of one of his t-shirts sticking out like a flag planted in foreign soil. I stared at it while brushing my teeth, while pulling on my jeans, while pouring cereal into a chipped bowl. It followed me, like a shadow. I couldn't shake to anyone else. It was just fabric in a box. But to me, it was a reminder of something deeper. Every drawer in that dresser had cost me hours of sweat, bruised knuckles, and frustration. Every drawer had been measured, considered, and filled with pieces of my life. And now one of them wasn't mine anymore. A tea breakfast. He leaned back casually, scrolling through his phone. By the way, I might bring a few more things over this week. Just basics. Socks. Maybe another hoodie. Saves me from carrying a bag all the time. My spoon froze midair. I smiled too tightly, milk dripping from the edge of the spoon back into the bowl. Oh, more stuff? He didn't even look up. Yeah, I mean, I'm here almost every day anyway. Might as well make it easier, right? Easier for who? I nodded, pretending to agree, but inside, my chest tightened, because it wasn't easier for me. Every extra thing he brought in made my room feel smaller, tighter, less mine. Every sock in the corner, every hoodie draped over my chair, every drawer half filled with his clothes whispered the same thing: your space doesn't belong to you anymore. That night, when he left, I sat on the floor again, pulled open the drawer, stared at the shirts folded inside. I touched one of them. Just cotton, soft, harmless. But my throat ached, and tears burned behind my eyes. I wanted to throw them out. I wanted to shove them back into his duffel bag and slam the door. But instead, I closed the drawer quietly, as if I were afraid to wake something dangerous. The worst part wasn't the drawer. It wasn't even him. It was me. Because I didn't say no. Because I let it happen. Because I was already bargaining with myself. It's just one drawer. It's just one hoodie. It's just one little sacrifice. But I knew the truth. Small things add up. And one day, you wake up and realize that the space you thought was yours has been taken piece by piece. Not because someone stole it, but because you gave it away. I turned off the light. The room felt different. Not homey. Not safe. It felt like a cage slowly closing in. And somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't about the drawer at all. This was the first crack in the foundation of us. At first, it didn't feel like a big change. He started sleeping over 3 nights a week instead of 2, then 4, then 5. By the time I realized what was happening, most weeks he was there almost every day. He didn't ask. He just arrived. Sometimes with a bag, sometimes without. Sometimes he'd say, "Hey, I thought I'd crash here tonight." Other times he simply never left. The strangest part was how my room began to smell different. My sheets, once scented faintly with lavender detergent, now carried his deodorant, his cologne, his sweat. My space was no longer just mine, it was ours. Even though I had never agreed to that, nights grew harder. He snored, loudly. It wasn't the soft, rhythmic kind of snore you could tune out. It was the kind that rattled through the mattress, that made my chest ache from holding back frustration. I started sleeping with earplugs, but even then, I woke up tired. He sprawled across the bed, limbs heavy. leaving me pressed against the edge like a guest in my own space. And every time I thought about saying something, really saying something, I froze. Because what if it made me sound cold? What if it made me sound like I didn't love him? So instead, I smiled in the mornings, brewed coffee for us both, and shoved my resentment into the back of my chest like clothes in an overstuffed drawer. The drawer wasn't the only thing he had claimed. One afternoon, I came home to find my moisturizer on the desk. The lid was off, and the smell was different, stronger, musky almost. He looked up casually from his phone. I mixed in a bit of my lotion. Makes it smell better, don't you think? I stared at the jar, my jar, the one thing I used every night, a small ritual that calmed me after long days. Now it wasn't mine anymore. It's just lotion, he said, rolling his eyes when he saw my face. Don't be dramatic. But it wasn't just lotion. It was the principle. It was the idea that nothing I owned was truly mine once he touched it. That my boundaries, no matter how small, were negotiable in his eyes. Later, he placed a bottle of chocolate milk between the bed and the wall, right against the fresh paint I had worked on for hours. I asked him not to, told him it would scrape, but he did it again the next day. And the next, every time I reminded him, he sighed, annoyed. Relax, it's fine. You're too uptight. And maybe I was. Maybe I was too uptight. But each little thing felt like a splinter under my skin, tiny, sharp, impossible to ignore. It wasn't about food. Not really. But when you've carefully measured out your dinner, counted the dumplings, stirred the sauce just right, and someone reaches over with their fork and takes one without asking, something inside you snaps. The first time he did it, I laughed, playful, harmless. The fifth time, I smiled through clenched teeth. By the 10th, I wanted to scream. Because it wasn't just a dumpling. It was the hours I spent making sure I had enough for me. It was the way he dismissed my no as though it were a joke. Come on, it's just one, he'd say, reaching across my plate. But it wasn't just one. It was always one more. One drawer, one lotion jar, one night, one dumpling. Piece by piece, my control over my own life was being chipped away. And when I told him how it made me feel, he laughed. You're overthinking everything. It's not that serious. But it was. That night, I lay awake while he snored beside me, the room thick with his presence. I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, not from anger, but from guilt, because I loved him, because he was kind in other ways. He kissed me good morning, he asked about my day, he made me laugh, because when we went out, people said we were perfect together. So why did I feel like I was drowning in my own life? I turned my face into the pillow, muffling a sob I didn't want him to hear. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I was too rigid, too sensitive, too protective of things that didn't matter. Maybe the problem wasn't him at all. Maybe the problem was me. But deep down, in the quiet part of me, I tried to ignore. A different thought whispered, if it hurts this much now, what happens when the small things become big things? I didn't have an answer. All I had was the growing fear that one day, I would wake up in the same bed, surrounded by things that weren't mine, and realize that somewhere along the way I had lost myself completely. It started with another sleepless night. The room was dark except for the faint orange glow of the streetlight outside my window. He was next to me, sprawled across the bed as though he owned it, his snoring rattling like thunder in my ears. I pressed the foam earplugs deeper, but it didn't help. I flipped to my side, then to the other. Still, his breathing swallowed the room. At 2:47 a.m., I got up and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my dresser, the one with the drawer he had claimed. The thought came uninvited. What if this is the rest of my life? Sleepless nights, crowded drawers, missing dumplings, lotion that no longer smelled like me. I felt a panic rise in my chest, sharp and suffocating. I needed air. So I grabbed my blanket and moved quietly to the couch in the living room. But the couch was narrow, lumpy. My neck ached. My feet dangled off the end. I lay there anyway, staring at the ceiling, trying not to cry. The next morning, he walked in, rubbing his eyes, hair a mess. Why'd you sleep out here? I forced a laugh. You were snoring pretty loud. I thought I'd let you have the bed. He frowned. You could have just nudged me. I would have turned over. I didn't say what I was really thinking. You never listen when I tell you about the snoring. Instead, I smiled. It's fine. But it wasn't fine. It was breaking me in places no one could see. A week later, the first real argument happened. He had left another hoodie on my desk chair, draped over my books, the sleeves brushing against my keyboard. My desk was my sanctuary, my one place to write, to think, to breathe. I picked up the hoodie and tossed it onto the bed. "Can you not leave your stuff all over my desk?" I asked when he walked in. My voice was sharper than I intended. He raised his eyebrows. "Seriously? It's just a hoodie." "Yes, but I don't even have room for my own things. I need that space." He sighed dramatically, throwing his bag onto the floor. "You're always so particular. It's exhausting." My cheeks flushed hot. "I'm not particular, I just want some space that's mine." "Space, space, space," he mocked, shaking his head. "You always talk about needing space, but relationships are about sharing. You can't keep acting like you live alone." Something inside me cracked. I do live alone. This is my room, my house. I never asked you to move in. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. His face darkened. "Wow, so that's how you really feel? That I'm just invading your life?" I froze. I hadn't meant it to come out like that, but maybe I had. Tears pricked my eyes. "That's not what He cut me off, grabbing his bag. "Forget it." He slammed the door behind him. I stood there in the silence, trembling, hating myself, hating him, hating how love could twist into something so suffocating without me even realizing it. He came back the next day with flowers. Lilies, my favorite. He knew exactly what would make me soften. "I'm sorry," he said, holding the bouquet awkwardly. "I overreacted. I feel comfortable here. Maybe too comfortable. I forget it's your space first. I'll do better." His voice was gentle, his eyes soft. The tension melted from my chest like ice in the sun. I wanted to believe him. I wanted the argument to vanish, replaced by laughter and kisses. So I forgave him. We cooked dinner together that night. He kissed my forehead while stirring pasta, made me laugh so hard I spilled sauce on the counter. For a few hours, everything felt perfect again. But later, when he reached over and stole a dumpling from my plate, smiling like it was a joke, something in me froze, because I realized he hadn't listened. Not about the dumplings, not about the lotion, not about the drawer. He never really listened, and I was starting to wonder if the flowers were less about love and more about keeping me quiet. One night, after he left for a late practice, I stood in front of the mirror brushing my hair. The girl staring back at me looked tired, not just from lack of sleep, but from something heavier, like carrying a weight no one else could see. I touched my reflection, whispering, "What's happening to you?" I used to be confident, independent, proud of my ability to stand my ground. Now I felt like a stranger in my own body, apologizing for things that weren't my fault, giving away pieces of myself in exchange for a peace that never lasted. And that's when the thought struck me, sharp and terrifying. If this is how it feels at 7 months, what will it feel like in 7 years? The drawer, the lotion, the food, these weren't random annoyances. They were patterns, signs, warnings. And as much as I loved him, as much as I wanted to believe we could make it work, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that love wasn't supposed to feel like this. The reflection in the mirror didn't answer me. She just stared back, silent, exhausted, and afraid. It began with silence. After our arguments, he stopped slamming doors. Instead, he'd retreat into silence, scrolling on his phone, jaw tight, eyes distant. I hated that silence more than yelling. "Are you mad at me?" I'd ask gently. "No," he'd answer, flat and sharp, but I knew he was, and slowly, I learned the pattern. Whenever I pushed back about the dumplings, about the bed, about my desk, he'd retreat into silence until I caved, until I apologized. The cycle left me dizzy. I started second-guessing myself before I spoke, rehearsing sentences in my head to make sure I didn't sound too demanding. I let him have his way in small things just to avoid that heavy silence, and in the process, I was losing something I didn't even know I was giving up. My voice. The room began to feel smaller, though nothing in it had changed. Clothes piled higher. His deodorant sat on my dresser. His sports gear leaned against the wall. My little sanctuary, once filled with books and candles and pieces of me, now looked like a storage closet for 2 lives crammed into one. Sometimes I'd walk in after work and just stand there, staring at the clutter. My chest would tighten until I had to step outside, breathing cold air like it was medicine. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did and didn't care. One evening, I found myself fantasizing not about moving in together, not about a bigger place, but about having the room to myself again. About walking in and knowing every item in the room was mine, untouched. exactly where I left it. That fantasy scared me because it meant that instead of dreaming about a future with him, I was longing for a past without him. It happened over dinner. I had made a careful portion of stir fry, counting out enough vegetables and sauce to last me 2 meals. I explained again that this was mine, that I needed it for lunch tomorrow. Halfway through the meal, he speared a chunk of chicken from my plate. Hey, I said sharply. He shrugged. Relax, it's food. We can always make more. No, I can make more, I snapped, louder than I meant to. You don't even cook. You just take. The table went silent. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. Then came the words that gutted me. God, you're selfish. You only ever think about yourself. The sentence cut deeper than any drawer or dumpling ever could, because selfishness was the word I had been whispering to myself in the dark for months. And hearing it from his lips made it feel real. That night, I lay awake beside him, tears sliding silently into my pillow. He slept peacefully, as if nothing had happened, but inside me, something was unraveling. I replayed his words over and over. You're selfish. I tried to weigh the evidence. Was wanting space selfish? Was protecting my boundaries selfish? Was asking not to have my food taken selfish? The more I thought about it, the more I realized he had made me feel guilty for wanting the bare minimum, for wanting respect, for wanting control over my own life. And the scariest part was how much I had started to believe him. The girl I used to be, the one who stood tall, who never apologized for taking up space, felt like a stranger now. I turned to look at him in the dark, his face calm, his breathing steady, and for the first time, I wondered, was I lying to myself when I said I loved him? Or was I just afraid of what it meant if I didn't? The silence of the room gave me no answer, only the sound of his breathing, filling the space that used to belong to me. Everything from the drawer to the dumplings to the word selfish has built to this moment. In part 5 AD, she can no longer ignore the truth. The relationship forces her into a breaking point where she must choose, lose herself, or fight for her boundaries. It was a Saturday afternoon when he showed up unannounced. I had been looking forward to one quiet day alone, just me, my books, a face mask, silence. But the knock on the door shattered that plan. Surprise, he said, grinning, bag slung over his shoulder. My heart sank. I forced a smile. Hey, I didn't know you were coming. Yeah, figured I'd just hang out. We can watch a movie. He dumped his bag on my bed like it belonged there. The room instantly felt smaller, suffocating. I wanted to say, not today. Please, not today. But the words stuck in my throat, because I knew what would follow. The silence, the guilt, the flowers, the cycle. So I swallowed my need for space again, and sat beside him on the bed, but deep down, resentment was curdling into something stronger. It started with nothing. We were making dinner, spaghetti, easy, quick. I reached for the sauce jar. He grabbed it too, playful at first, then stubborn. Let me, he said. I've got it. Come on. You always. Something inside me snapped. Why do you always have to touch everything? Why can't you just let me do one thing without stepping in? The room went still. He stared at me, shocked. Then his face hardened. Wow, you really are impossible. I slammed the jar down on the counter. No, I'm not impossible. I'm exhausted. Do you even realize how much space you take up in my life? My bed, my food, my lotion, my drawers, my air. I stopped, breathless, his jaw clenched. I thought relationships were about sharing. Guess I was wrong. I laughed bitterly. Sharing? You don't share, you take. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. That night, after he stormed out, I stood in front of the mirror again. The girl staring back at me didn't look tired anymore. She looked broken, but underneath the cracks, I saw something else, something fierce. Something I thought I had lost. I whispered to my reflection. Enough. I was done apologizing for wanting boundaries. Done questioning whether love meant sacrifice or self-erasure. Done calling myself selfish for needing air to breathe. Love wasn't supposed to feel like drowning. For the first time in months, I felt clarity. I didn't know if I was ready to end things completely, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If I stayed quiet any longer, I would lose myself forever. When he came back the next day, flowers in hand, rehearsed apology on his lips, I stopped him at the door. We need to talk, I said. His smile faltered. Babe, I know, I cut in. My voice was steady, stronger than I expected. You don't get to come in. Not this time. He blinked, stunned. What are you saying? I'm saying I can't keep doing this. You don't listen. You don't respect my space. And I can't live like this anymore. His jaw tightened. So that's it? You're just giving up? I swallowed hard. My hands were shaking, but my voice didn't waver. I'm not giving up. I'm saving myself. The silence between us stretched, heavy and final. Finally, he dropped the flowers on the step, muttered something under his breath, and walked away. I closed the door and leaned against it, tears running down my face. Not from sadness, but from release. The room was quiet, empty, mine again. And for the first time in months, I could finally breathe.